We are going live. It's our time currently. It's the time that we committed to start. Firstly, let me thank the host, which is the Department of Publicity and Information, and thank the NEC for giving us strategic direction that assist us and guide us as we do this work. I would like to thank my President, Mzwanele Nyonso, and our Secretary General in the guidance they give us as we do the work that we are supposed to do. Our topic today is the African personality. Basically, source documents that we will be using is the Pan-Africanist Manifesto of the PAC that was adopted in 1959. It's the disciplinary code of the PAC that guides us in terms of how should we behave, which assists us to define the African personality. We will then, for further reading, useful sources, particularly Black Skin, White Mask by Fanon, and the falsification of the African consciousness by Dr. Amos Wilson. What are we going to be dealing with today? Basically, we're going to be dealing with our topic in 6 elements. The first element is what is personality? Secondly, we're going to explore the area of why personality is important. Thirdly, we're then going to look specifically on the African personality and look at where exactly is the African personality now, or the genesis that has brought the African personality to where we are now. Then we're gonna determine on what action can we put to ensure that the personality that we have as African people, the African personality, serve the African interest. And then we will look at the solution and the practical action that we need to take right now as a collective. I hope that we are together in that sequence of events that we are looking at. As I must say that it's a very great privilege to have you online and to be able to talk to you today. Defining the African personality in general, personality is a coherent set of operations. What does that mean? It basically means that it's a number of elements working together. It's basically, as Dr. Wilson put it, it's basically the convergence and the divergence of the internal on one side and the external on the other. Then what is this internal that we are talking about? When we are talking about the internal element that has to basically converge or diverge with the external, the internal factors are the cognitive, the emotional, and behavior. Those 3 elements are internal. That means that the psychological element, the consciousness, and the actions that we take as we behave, as either we view ourselves or view it from external, which is really about the thinking, the feeling, and the acting. Are we together? Basically, those 3 things then form the internal, which is the identity. Then what are the external issues that are rising? What are the external factors that then formulate and create this thing that we call personality? Then you have two major issues. One is biological and the other one is environmental. So the environmental factors and the biological factors have an effect on personality. And on the other side, the character or the personality can also affect the external, which is the biological and environmental factors. So, in essence, we are talking about issues that talks to identity and talks to reputation. Identity is how do you define yourself, and reputation is how others define you. That is basically when we talk about personality, we're talking about those elements, internal, external. Unlike character, which will only talk about external. Interestingly, on why do we have to actually entertain this question at all? We have to entertain this question because of once you bring the external into the discussion, it basically means that there is a possibility of conditioning. You know, when they take the animals to the circus, when they take the animals to the circus, before they have to present it to the show, they first have to condition the lion so that the lion can only behave like a puppy and don't eat the person who owns or who plays on the circus. Similarly, on the personality, whoever has been given the power to condition will determine the actual behavior of the conditioned. So when you look at the personality, we discuss it because personality affects power relations. Personality determines that you are in power, you are a perpetrator, or you command power, or you are a victim of those who command power. Therefore, we must understand the personality and what kind of personality make us meek sufficiently to be controlled by others. So you have a choice. Either you conditioned yourself, you conditioned by friends, you get conditioned by your enemy. And all enemies will have interest in conditioning you. Because when you read the literature of war, war is never won in battle, but war is won in the public relations arena, where whoever is declared as victorious is the one that can get the sympathy of the general populace and be viewed as the one who has won. So the concrete facts are not the ultimate deciders of victory in war. And as African people, we're aware that we've been at war for 5,000 years. Firstly, by the West Asians or Arab/Persians, later the European. Today we'll focus on looking what has been the impact of the European in affecting our personality. Hence, we're having this discussion on the personality. Personality is very important because personality is what determines the most important events of your life. Personality determines how you measure success? How do you say I'm successful? Personality is what determines what makes you entertained and what you detest. Personality is what makes you interact with others. Therefore, it determines what kind of relationships you have and what kind of relating with others, friends, enemies, oppressors, and those you oppress, determined by your personality. Hence, the European designed the white supremacy theory and created the white supremacy personality, which has been dominant in the world and which created a genesis of our problem. It's important to note, if you hear anything, why we need to talk about personality. Just know that personality determines the power relationships. The personality of the parties in relationship determine what kind of relationship would you have. Narrowing it down to the African personality has been contaminated. And for us to start rebuilding or repairing or healing this African personality, we have to understand the source of the problem. We have to understand the genesis that has been taken by the African personality. If you read the PAC document, which is called the Africanist Manifesto, that was the founding document of the PAC, you will then understand on section A where the PAC talks about the chain reaction. Because the end of that analysis of the source of the problem on the African personality, as the PAC define it, basically it says that our problem starts with the expansion of the markets. With the expansion of the markets for the European, then there was a rise of capital, particularly of commercial capital. So our problem starts with the era of the rise of commercial capital and the expansion of markets. Then what happened? When those arises, then there was a need for land. More land, more markets, which made the European start migrating out of Europe to search for new markets, for new lands. When they attained the land, they then found even more that there were minerals that were in the market that could sustain the commercial, can feed the commercial capital. Because they want to continuously rise and accumulate more capital. So our lands were colonized by corporates, not by nation state. If we understand that, we will then understand the rhetoric of investors and why is it a problem to the African personality. When the land as it move interior, then they realize that they will have a conflict among ourselves. Then they bring the religious element, where the Pope then gives the award, because the Pope dictates the European and the white supremacy, has authority over white supremacy. he then give a papal award, an award to the Portuguese, that Portuguese Africa belongs to you. You will know that the first European on this era, because the Romans came before, the Greeks came before, but on a different orientation than when the Portuguese landed in what now is called Angola in the 14th century. You then have this genesis of 300 odd years where after the Pope gives that award, then you get to the element where Europeans start raiding. They started raiding land earlier, if you remember what I've indicated. But now they get into raiding us as human beings, as people. Then they enslave us. Those are the slave raids that the African Manifesto on the chain reaction is referring to. They start raiding because concurrently Americas are also on the similar attack. The land is being found. Now they want to take our people and utilize them to create what? To recreate what initially they started with, commercial capital, to feed commercial capital. That's why the PAC is clear about its stance on imperialism. We are clear anti-imperialist, we are clear anti-capitalism, because it's a source of our pain as a people. The problem doesn't stop there, because now they've got labor that they have stolen. They now could fuel their industries. They now, you see the development of industry. Therefore, the industrial revolution does not sit on the shoulders of the European worker. It sits on the free labor that has been stolen, on the labor that has been cruelly taken from African people. Then the industrial revolution starts. When the industrial revolution starts, hence you see them starting to talk about emancipation, stop slavery, because they've got another means of extrapolating labor in favor of establishment of capital. They already have stolen land and they've discovered minerals that are critical for the new industry that they are formulating. Are we still together in the genesis of the source of the contamination of the African personality? That's where the African personality is then violated. We were intact when the land was taken. We were even intact when they started enslaving us. But then they actively violated the African personality. So you find the definition where the African Manifesto guides us that basically now you see three elements. One, there is land that is independent to the people. Then you got the African people on one side. Then you got an African personality as the trio in that triangle. Then the African personality is not the African person. The African personality is not the African land, which is very important for us to understand. Hence, you see the definition of who's the African in the PAC kind of differ. It just does not stop statically. It moves dynamically. Remember, we are dealing with the African personality. So, what do we then mean? What is the problem that we are discussing today? We have indicated that the African personality is violated. The effect of the violation of the African personality was that the African personality is now experiencing complex trauma. In the trauma studies, they normally highlight acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. And fourthly, the post-trauma stress. Some will say that we are in a post-trauma stress. If we were free and independent, we will be dealing with the post-trauma stress of the African personality. But we are not independent. We are only free to do the wrong things. They free us so that we can be able to work for them independently. That's why white supremacy personality allow us to be free, as yesterday they were talking about Freedom Day. Because we have to be free to serve them without them having to put effort. We have to be free to be destructive of ourselves. But we remain not independent. We remain not being a sovereign personality. Complex trauma. Complex trauma then create problems in society. In general, let's reflect on our own society. People affected with trauma, or a society affected with trauma, will have high substance abuse. What is the situation in our communities today? How much substance abuse is there? Taking a step back in history, if you understand that the test and the theory on substance abuse basically indicates that most people who are affected by substance abuse have had trauma, 70 to 75% on different studies. So when you look at that, you'll understand why then the white supremacists like Hendrik Verwoerd then bring bars, taverns, and alcohol closer to our communities, because they feel that they have contaminated the African personality sufficiently that it's susceptible. It's susceptible to substance abuse, so that the deterioration of the African personality go even further. Where does gender violence come from? When people have been abused and have gone through trauma, it is automatic that they will want to take out their trauma on whoever is weaker. Hence, you see a lot of weaker men, muscle-wise, are beaten up by those who feel that they've got stronger muscles. Men are likely to beat up women. Women with higher muscles will beat up men. Children will be beaten up in the way that violates the biological factors. How much self-worth is there in our communities? Because of the trauma, you see a lot of self-worthlessness, self-worthlessness, self-hate, self-harm. It's because of the trauma. In the society that is traumatized, you cannot expect a lot of trust, a lot of mistrust, emancipate there. A lot of things that generate self-hate, which generate more and more mistrust and feed the deterioration of the African personality. You have low emotional intelligence, meaning that you got lower stability. That is generally what a society that has affected trauma or an individual trauma experiences or manifest their internal. We've said earlier that there is an internal and external conditions. So as we define the solution, we must understand what we must understand that there is an impact in our personality. I want us to transit to the solution. The PAC defines us for a solution. But I'm not going to do what you are expecting today. I'm not going to tell you what is the ideal African personality, because I want you to use a particular scale that I'm going to present to you. The scale, the ideal personality, as we indicated earlier, personality determine what is success and how do you measure success. How do you measure that you are successful? So, when we have dealt with that, you have to do some homework. One, there are many ways of identifying personality, but let's use this scale for this exercise. One, it's a scale of 5 dimensions, then of high to low. Firstly, if you have to identify a personality, you have to say how open is the personality to experience. Are you able to engage in new experience, or you want to keep to what your forefathers has told you to do? Or you want to keep to what you've been taught what to do and you've been conditioned? How open are you to new experience as a personality? 2, you then have to look at how conscientious are you? How disciplined, how focused is the personality that you are analyzing? Or is just willy-nilly we go with the flow kind of personality? That is the second dimension, conscientiousness. Then as you measure the personality, you have to look at extraversion. How sociable is the personality? How open it is to interact and engage with others. That's a third dimension when you look at this personality and you want to measure and define it as such. And as you are looking at the personality, you also have to say how agreeable. Is the personality rigid? Is it dogmatic? Is not open to be convinced by anything? Is on the other side of the scale of agreeability. Then you have to answer the question, is the personality then just have no opinion, it's just agree to everything because it's got no stand of its own? That's agreeability. Then lastly, you have to look at neuroticism. Neuroticism talk about emotional stability. How stable is this personality? Then the challenge is with you. The challenge is with you to then define which, in those 5 scales, where do we need to be in order to be able to wage a successful revolution against our enemies. Because without the correct personality, we will always be defeated. We were only defeated when the African personality was corrupted and fully, and be able and make the colonizers not to need to be on the African continent in order to control Africans. They can now have a remote control because the personality has been contaminated, has been conditioned sufficiently for neo-colonial era. Are we still in the same path? Then your homework is to go and analyze, where are we as a personality, as an African personality? Where is the African personality now with those 5 scales, and where the African personality has to go? Our Deputy President Lunga Mantashe has highlighted the case for change a past couple of weeks ago. He highlighted, where are we now? What are the structural conditions that we have? And what is the African personality that allow those conditions, those structural conditions to strive? That's a question to you. And on the other side, where should we be? We should define the African personality that guarantees victory and guarantees the change in the power relationships. As I indicated, the aim of this talk is that we must understand the personality and in relation with power. Because as the African people, we don't want to stay in the powerlessness. Because in this personality that we project as African people, we are a meal for everyone. Europeans, starting with Arabs, have been on top of us. You have Europeans that are coming on top of us. There are fears that the Far Asians want to be on top of us. They are creating conditions for them to be our new colonizers and our new rulers. And the current personality permits that. How do we then correct the current personality? Let me try to move a little faster. The disciplinary code of the PAC, particularly on 8 and 9, on section 8 and 9, then gives us a way to correct this contaminated African personality. How do we correct it? What do we need to do? What do we need to do collectively? And what do we need to do personally? Those 2 sections of our disciplinary code as the PAC then tells what an individual must do. Firstly, it says that as we walk the path of healing, 1, we must acquire knowledge. Data is an external factor. That biological factors and those environmental factors are then come into us through sensors that we have. Touch, feel, taste, then brings them in. That is what we call data. Acquisition of data and ability to process data and transforming it into information into knowledge, into wisdom. Then the personality will be affected by that external stimuli. Secondly, the PAC then talks, as it talks about the personal habit, healthy. African and Africanist, we must control our food supply chain. We must farm. We must make sure that the fertilizers that comes into our food, the pesticide that come to our food, the vehicles that contain our food as we transport it, our ways of planting our food is of such a way that it gives the biological factors that empowers our the African personality. Remember, biological and environmental factor affects the feeling, the thinking, and the acting. So, food safety, food security, it's a matter of survival. Hence, we propagate for an agrarian revolution to ensure that we control the land, we control the planting. That's healthy behavior as subsection A of the habits instructors. Food goes with cleanliness. The PAC then instructs us to be clean, to make sure that we maintain high standard of hygiene. We are going to COVID situation now, the coronavirus. What is the solution that is being put? Wash your hands. It's basically maintain hygiene, lift your hygiene to the higher level to make sure that the physical environmental factors do not affect the biological factors that end up affecting your emotion, feelings, thinking, and acting that compose the personality. Then it takes us outside from a reputation point of view and an identity point of view. The disciplinary code then teaches us that as we go outside, as we depart from our own cocoons, we must always do that with honor, with dignity, and with proper decorum. It means that we must maintain high level of manners. We must maintain high level of culture. We must maintain a high culture. Manners, not manners as they define them. Manners as we define them. Honor and dignity. You must project it every time to strengthen the African personality. That must be done also by you being punctual, by you committing to the deadlines and meeting your deadlines. If we create that habit, we are strengthening the African personality. This thing of African time is time where you come to us late. It must stop. That does not reflect opportunities for success for the African personality. It says that we must be tireless. We must beat everyone on work ethics. But interestingly, it says for the work of the PAC and the work of the nation, because you can be a hard worker but working for the interest of white supremacists or Arabic supremacists or Asian supremacists. We must be careful of where we put our effort as we work tirelessly. Increase our high working ethics. It also directs that we must demonstrate Interestingly, it doesn't say we must talk about it. We must demonstrate honesty, frankness, and courtesy. It puts these three contradictions in one sentence, because frankness with dishonesty is very dangerous. Frankness with a lack of courteousness, it's very hurtful. It then feeds the self-hate. Honesty, frank, and courteousness must be demonstrated. It then is, while it says that, also that honesty, frankness, and courtesy then translate to how we relate. It also says, as a habit, we must respect African womanhood and we must maintain gender equality. That is to beef up the African personality. Is to beef up the African personality. And before it closes, it says that we must be scientific in our approach. It says that every time we approach the world problems, we must approach them from a principled approach. From a principled approach, which means from a rigid scientific process that will assist us to do the analysis, diagnostics, and design of proper solutions, and make sure that the solutions that we come with are of African interest. Lastly, on the habits, it then tells us that we must maintain true love. It just does not say love. It says true love. True love, it's also go with frankness. When I love you and you do the wrong thing, I'll tell you. When I just love you with false love, I will mislead you. So it says that we must have true love. True love to the African people, true love to the fatherland, true love to the humanity as a whole. We must love because our struggle and the personality that we are trying to make is not for us to be the new oppressors, but is to remove oppression and liberate the whole mankind. That's why we are in the noblest cause on earth, the liberation of humankind. Remember your homework. You then have to determine, based on that scale, what kind of a personality we must empower and develop. I hope that we are starting to ask questions so that it just does not become a one-way street. So, as we are doing your homework, do these habits. Let's do these habits as a society. Let's teach our children these habits. Let's work on these habits so that we can take ourselves to the new Africa that Lembede is talking about. To the new African personality that is renewed, that is able to have its fight. I see some questions that our comments, they are highly appreciated. Appreciation of the importance of the topic and the question on how the PAC plans. We'll tackle that. Tunzi, I see that question, that what is the plan of the PAC? And daughter of the soil, really it's correct. We're living in a traumatic society. We're living in a traumatized society. The trauma has not stopped. The application and the instruments that give us trauma has not stopped. Kokwana, you are correct. It's free for all because our personality allows everyone to touch us the way it's necessary. Dombiamaziz, you are correct. The situation now, everyone is on top of us. We are just a meal. We are a prey for every predator that comes into our rhyme. I must acknowledge the food security. Comrade Vusi, you are correct. We must maintain the issue of food security. Also, you are correct that we cannot have daily bread without the land. The land must give us. We must control the land. We must control the personality. But let me just show the effect of what happened when you have an issue of a weakened and contaminated African personality. What has happened to people who have won lotto? The African people who have won lotto. In 3 months, they finished 7 million. What happened to these entrepreneurs? They have not built one factory, but instead they go to the cruise and bring all their friends and have partied to Mauritius. If not out of Africa, to France or to Britain, so that they feel important. How do we fight substance abuse? We fight substance abuse by Comrade Tapelo. We fight substance abuse by applying these habits. We must apply habits. We must find new addiction. We must be addicted to consumption of data. We must be addicted to healthy lifestyle. Because once you are addicted, you cannot live without an addiction. Oh, by the way, they made us getting addicted to sugar. That's a substance as well. And that's very destructive to our biological factors. We, as Alex is saying, we normally mistake our friends. Our friends are not guaranteed to be our friends forever. Hence, the PAC teaches us that we are not interested in looking from the east or the west. We are interested in sustaining and maintaining African interest. And that should be our guiding light. Even when we move to the left or we move to the right, we must always maintain African interest. We should not care about our positions, the positions that we hold. We must dump positions as soon as they are not in the interest of the African interest. I hope that becomes clear. There is a question which says that what opposes the African personality? The direct opposition, I must say this before, the African personality is not the antithesis, it's the synthesis. It breaks from the current condition of where the world operates to the higher culture, to the higher level. It moves from an antithesis to a synthesis. Hence, you'll find that there is a thesis currently in the world, which is the white supremacy personality. Then there is the antithesis, which is African nationalism from our perspective. Then it moves when we then make those collide very aggressively. You then transform to the higher level, which is Africanism, where the African personality lives. You are correct. You are correct, noble son Embo, that civilization is informed by ethical and high moral values. But we must be careful who determine the values. The values must be on our own. In coming closer to closing, with us being left with 10 minutes, I will then not answer any further questions. I will take the questions to our Secretary General and the Publicity Department for them to consolidate on the next theme of our discussion as the PAC. What is the call to action? We have listened to a lot of things today. So what? We don't do theory for the sake of theory, but we do theory for practice. We've already indicated the first action. The action is that the 10 elements that the disciplinary code indicate on personal habits, that must be followed individually, and we must start testing each other if we are following those ethics. We must choose our leaders in accordance to their compliance to the disciplinary code in terms of their personal habit, in terms of their acquisition of knowledge, their thirst for knowledge. That's action 1. Action 2 is that we must develop sources of authority. Those in the education sector will talk about the epistemology and the pedagogy. Who owns knowledge and how knowledge is dispersed. That means that we must control the sources of data that stimulate our society and that stimulate ourselves personally. Also, we must then control the domain of discourse. We must start determining what is being discussed. Currently, white supremacy, imperialism dictate what is important. They dictate through the curriculum that they have in institutions of learning. Therefore, we must establish our own system of education. Of course, we are lucky that in Azania there is a framework of education that allows us. Once you are able to determine what are the outcomes that are required, you can feed any content. Therefore, we must start actively driving the issue of decolonization of the curriculum so that we can socialize our own society instead of being socialized by the Americans, Europeans, and now later Asians are coming, being Indians, Chinese, or Japanese. We must develop our own sources of authority. That is the second action that we are called to do. Most importantly, we must role model. We must role model these habits. Initially, we said the first one is for you, for yourself, to live these 10 habits. But more, role model. People must see the African personality through you. That's the only time you can call yourself an Africanist. Because you are not an Africanist because you filled in a form, or because you attend Africanist ceremonies, or because you participate in Africanist rituals. But you are an Africanist because you project the African personality that guarantees victory for the African people and the prevalence of the African interest, role modeling. Then thirdly, we must utilize the legal instruments. We must utilize their own laws to beat the system. In law, there is personality rights. Those are the rights that you have for your own identity, and the rights that you have over your own body, and the rights that you have on your reputation. The Secretary for Legal and Constitutional Affairs has made this call that we must actively identify, raise, and be ready to take legal action against those who tamper with the African identity and African reputation. Let's not theorize and re-explain the African personality. Let's enforce it in a multifrontal condition. We've been in courts for a long time for wrong reasons or for right reasons. But now we have to go to courts for activism reasons, to assert our people's rights for their own personality. We must confront brutality, police brutality, and army brutality hands-on. That's the action that we are calling you to as the PAC. We must not fear courts. That means that we must be able to record data in a manner that can go to court. So every Africanist must understand the law of evidence so that we can be able to produce evidence that is undisputable in any court of law, particularly those courts that we do not control. Lastly, we must consume what we produce. Therefore, our economic activities, our talent must be directed in guaranteeing our food security and our food safety first of all, and then we start taking over everything that we consume and produce it ourselves and control the supply chain thereof. Lastly, the PAC last year have joined the Africanists across the world in us launching the campaign for the African reparations. Reparations talk directly to the issue of self-healing, requesting assistance from others or learning from others how they heal themselves, and demanding compensation for the hurt that we have suffered as a people. That's why, comrades, we're calling you to teach yourself and learn about African reparations. I will request you to go to a document that has been produced by Africans, which is the Bridgetown Protocol, and look around page 47, where we have discussed and talked about how reparations should be approached. Because remember, we always approach our issues scientifically in our approach, in a principled approach. We don't just fire in all cylinders. So we call upon our president will be in the next coming months when we get out of this lockdown. We'll be calling you on particularly activities and action in demand of our reparation, starting with those companies that supported apartheid in Azania. We call on all Africans across the whole continent to identify those companies, to do the necessary scientific work which will determine how much of our labor has been exploited, how much rent are we owed on our own land, and how much personality rights has been violated, and what damage should we be claiming for? It's an exercise that is not easy. We need every facet, every skill in the African society to come and assist us to build the case for African reparation. We cannot not be compensated for our damage. We cannot not self-heal. We cannot learn from others who have gone to a quarter of cruelty that we went through to say, how did they repair their own personality beyond the 10 steps that the PAC teaches us in the disciplinary code. I thank you for attending this session. In the next session, we will be looking at how do we relate with others? How does this disciplinary code of the PAC teaches us to relate with others, other parties, other nations, friends, alliances, and such questions. And we will look a little bit deeper what gives us success. Maybe with your homework, having you done the homework of what is the kind of personality on the scale of openness, on the scale of conscientiousness, on the scale of agreeability, on the scale of neuroticism, and on the scale of extrovertism. What kind of a African personality are we in the process of building? As I said, even if you have not answered that question, if you follow the habits that the PAC has prescribed, you will definitely get to the promised land of an African personality that is ready for conquest. Izwe lethu.